Going into The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 3, I had considered this whole series near flawless, at least in my mind, and it was my favorite JRPG series of all time. That is, until I met the new members of Class 7. You see, the Trails series is known for having a protagonist with a very strong supporting cast. And in Trails of Cold Steel 3 in particular, you're in this very interesting predicament where if you played the previous games, you're going to have an affinity towards the cast from the first two games. The primary through line between Cold Steel 1, 2, and 3 is the protagonist, Rean Schwarzer. While Cold Steel 2 doesn't finish with a cliffhanger, you're left with a lot of unanswered questions that are immediately present at the onset of Cold Steel 3. The problem is, instead of giving the player the answers they've been waiting for with the characters that you've been so invested with, you're introduced to a brand new supporting cast. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about how they do set up the game. Rean is a young history teacher at Thor's Military Academy's Branch campus, the hero of the Erebonian Civil War and the Ashen Chevalier. If you played all the Legend of Heroes games up until this point, you're going to have entirely different feelings and responses to those who have not played it before. For example, early in the opening train ride, you come across a young blonde girl and a tough redheaded looking guy with Liberlian accents. For those of you who have never played the series before Cold Steel 3, you don't know anything about them other than the game is introducing you to the characters, so they must be a little important. However, for those of you who have played the entire Legend of Heroes saga up until this point, it is a moment filled with hype and excitement that will cause you extreme joy, because at this point, if you played the 7 previous games, you are fully invested and love the fact that you just came across Agate and Tita in the first 5 minutes of Cold Steel 3, who you have not seen or heard from for 4 total games. This happens multiple times throughout this game as characters, references, and important bits of lore are introduced at various moments in the game, leaving new players trying to quickly adapt to all of the incoming information, and veterans of the series just living out this hype-induced experience with a dumb smile on their face as more and more fan favorites pop up from the Sky Trilogy, the Crossbell arc, and the return of the original Class 7 from Cold Steel 1 and 2. After Rean arrives and leaves the city that is home to the branch campus of one of the most prestigious military schools, you begin to notice that something just isn't quite right. This branch campus, only 30 or so minutes away by train from the main campus, seems like a school fit for juvenile delinquents, bad actors, and you're just not good enough for the main campus, so you can be here instead. It is here that you are eventually introduced to a very unique cohort at the institution, Class 7 Special Operations, that is full of some very storied individuals. Rean, the protagonist and the leader of the original Class 7, is the head instructor. This is where I struggled. The new members of Class 7, including Altina Orion, which I really was not a fan of from Cold Steel 2, just did not sit right with me after having grown to love the dynamic of the original Class 7 from Cold Steel 1 and 2. Furthermore, depending on your experience with the series, the way this game plays out gameplay and pacing wise, Cold Steel 3 is a direct reflection of your experiences in Cold Steel 1. Each chapter plays out by spending some time on campus first before heading out on some field exercises that culminate in a big final battle somewhere in Erebonia. It's often like the arc of an anime, played out in a much shorter amount of time. My feelings here are honestly mixed. While the developers did a good job mixing up the formula in some respects, adding in things like the Panzer Soldat training along with new types of quests, I really wasn't expecting Cold Steel 3 to feel absolutely identical to Cold Steel 1 and 2. Now, if you are just starting out with Cold Steel 3, you're enjoying massive lore exposition around every corner, being introduced to the rich history of the Zemirian continent and beginning to understand what's going on and why Rean and these other characters are so central to the plot. Everything that happens in the opening moments of the game pushes you as the player into this disquiet. By the time the first day of the first field exercise was over, I was already feeling the pain my characters were going through as one of the primary antagonists in the series makes their presence known in a powerful, defining way. It is so much so early on. There's this strong push from Ouroboros, the main enemy group, and you immediately feel for these Branch Academy students. They are not equipped to handle this. They are not ready to face the pain that awaits them. And you, as the player, if you have played the previous games, know it. There's nothing they can do but try to survive as everything in Erebonia becomes increasingly harder. Try as I might, Reen's students and I were not connecting until the end of chapter 2. It was then the magic of Cold Steel, the magic of the Legend of Heroes saga, finally clicked in Trails of Cold Steel 3. Yes, this game was harder for me to digest as the stakes raised. Yes, the way the plot had advanced frustrated me because it just wasn't going to end the way I wanted it to. And honestly, I'm such a huge fan of this series and I'm not even sure calling this a review is fair. The way my emotions resonate with the series is unlike anything else I've ever played up until this point. My wife often tells me she hears me downstairs sometimes cheering or sniffling at whatever is going on, and I think that alone is an indicator for where I am at with this particular game and the series as a whole. There was this feeling of helplessness I received as the game pushed ever closer to the climax. I couldn't wait to see what would happen, but at the same time, I also wanted it to be over. There were some painful moments. There was lots of missing context and clues that kept me hooked in constantly, and then the ending. I suppose as one of the biggest fans of this series, it gives me a chance to also be its biggest critic. Don't get me wrong, I love Trails and fully recommend this game to fans of story-based games, particularly JRPGs. In fact, I don't know why this series isn't just as beloved as Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. In all honesty, my biggest gripe with this game comes down to the combat. There is no advantage to experimenting, and arts just simply seem to be pointless. Now, there's a lot of discussion around how you can put together builds for your characters that allow you to create very broken, overpowered fighters. And I think that is fun and shouldn't be taken away. But there is very little advantage to do more than simply create characters that can spam their S-crafts over and over with regular healing along with buffs and debuffs. In my playthrough, I focused primarily on negative status effects and all-out damage. In your orbments, you can set 2 quartz. For example, I set the Gloom quartz in Yuna. Gloom would have a certain percentage chance of having various negative status effects such as poison, fire, sleep, etc. Her second Master Quartz was another that would cause lower defense, speed, or attack debuffs. She had a Gladiator headband which would regenerate her craft points faster and speed increasing orbments so that she would always go first. Every battle I had Yuna or anyone else I could equip the Gloom Master Quartz on always open with a large AoE craft that would inflict as much negative status as possible before coming in with my damage dealers to clean up. Unless it was a battle that was particularly challenging or there was a slight puzzle element to it to more easily defeat a boss, I just kept with what worked. I felt very little need to use arts or inflict damage that different enemies were more susceptible to. The natural way the game progresses is mostly through normal weapon damage, crafts, and healing spells. You're never really given strong enough incentives to stick with and use the game's plethora of magical abilities. There are some powerful and very flashy looking spells that just never get used, and it's a shame. The combat is still fun, and in my opinion, Cold Steel 3 is the best version of the Legend of Heroes combat system so far. I really enjoy the addition of the break system in Brave Orders, which if used properly can be a powerful way to turn a battle. The break system is a separate bar from HP that when finally depleted puts enemies into a stunned state where every attack against them allows you to do significantly more damage with a teammate that you are linked with via the battle orbment until the enemy comes out of its stunned state. Beyond that, every enemy, including bosses, can be stunned, though the duration of the break for more powerful enemies is significantly shorter. Sometimes it's wiser to heal up than keep fighting when your opponent is stunned. I've got to be honest, the orbment system wherein you upgrade your quartz and the slots they go into has always frustrated me to try to figure out. And this installment does not make it any easier, at least in my opinion. There are deep crafting systems in this game that never really seemed useful to me. Playing on the normal difficulty, I never really felt like I needed to grind more than maybe a level or two before moving forward. Otherwise, the very basics they give you are enough. Is it the most efficient? I am unsure, because the game does not teach you how to go deep or really encourage experimentation. The weapons, armor, and accessories you find are given, craft, purchase, or upgrade are fantastic. And the quests in the game give you a lot of exposure to the possibilities, but not so much to the quartz. Perhaps if you play on very hard or nightmare, they would become more important. Panzer Soldat and Divine Knight battles are still awesome in this game. Having seen the entire idea behind the mech battles fleshed out into something that is far more spectacular and interesting than they were in Cold Steel 2 makes me realize that the slow burn that is the Legend of Heroes storyline plays into the Divine Knights and the Panzer Soldats. Everything builds one step onto another as they work to weave together this grand story, and you should absolutely play it.